Hello, everyone. How are you doing this evening?
Tammera, we're gonna introduce you.
Okay. All right. Great.
We're excited. We're ready for you, but we're gonna properly introduce you. You're a very important person, and so we want to do this correctly. So I just, first of all, before we hear from our presenter, I'm Dr. Mary Chapman, and I'm chairman of the Des Moines branch, NAACP Women in NAACP. And I want to welcome you to the 4-part education series on recruitment and retention of foster parents. The topic this evening is trauma and its impact on African-American children in foster care. Women in NAACP is a standing committee in the national organization of NAACP for the purpose of enhancing the leadership role of women and serve as an advocacy vehicle to address the social, economic, political, educational, health, and welfare issues affecting women, as well as advocate for the emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual development of children. The WIN committee meets every third Monday at 6 p.m. and the next meeting is Monday, November 15th. Now, this year, we're focusing on community engagement conversations, and which we're in one this evening, foster care family awareness and relationship to Black children in the system, and defending democracy through voter registration and advocacy. Defending our democracy is a serious matter, and you have an opportunity to act on Tuesday, November 2nd, by voting in your local city council and school board elections. Be an educated voter. If you don't know your candidates, tune into the various virtual candidate forums. And I'm sure there was someone that will be putting those links for you to access those forums in the chat. So also join WIN and other collaborating organizations on November 9th at a virtual forum where you will have an opportunity to learn more about the Freedom to Vote Act, America's next great civil rights bill. And you can check out the details on the NAACP website. This evening, it is all about the issue of foster care. We want to again welcome those of you who are joining us for the first time and our returning champions of children and families. Thank you for continuing the journey of educating ourselves and our community. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Susan Prattis, a fellow WIN member who is a practicing veterinarian and through her company is a medical and science writer and a technical and science specialist in patent protection. Dr. Prattis will be our moderator this evening and will introduce our presenter. Before Dr. Prattis presents our speaker, I want to remind you to put your name and email in the chat. If you didn't note in your registration that you would like CEU credit or foster parent training credit. Also, everyone will be on mute except the speakers. So if you have a question, put your question in the chat. So having said all of that, Dr. Prattis, the screen is now yours.
Thank you, Dr. Chapman. A lovely introduction and welcome to everybody who's here. So glad that we have all the foster parents and all of our interested parties. I will make one comment because I have a 4-legged roommate who wants to come visit me. So I'm gonna, if you hear a little woof from time to time, that will be. I am very proud to present Ms. Tammera Bibbins. Tammera is an adjunct faculty member at the University of Iowa School of Social Work. She finished her bachelor's in psychology at the University of Houston in 1993. She finished her MSW at the University of Houston in 1998. She finished her LMSW, licensed master's in social work, in 1999, and she became a licensed independent social worker in 2002. And the topic today is going to be a deep dive into the idea of trauma and attachment in a culturally sensitive way, because we're going to discuss African-American children that are placed in foster care. She has provided individual therapy to children and families through several local communities in this area. She also has been a member previously of the Regional Child Protection Center at the Blank Children's Hospital, that's now known as the Star. And in October 2007, she started as a forensic interviewer. And so I'm sure she'll have quite a bit to tell us about that. She then transitioned in 2018 into a different position, where she is now serving as the attachment and trauma therapist for the Star Center's foster care clinic. I mentioned that she's adjunct at the University of Iowa School of Social Work, also that she now has a private mental health practice, the Grapevine Clinical. And she, as a part of that, she does the forensic interviewing as well as quite a bit of interaction with community organizations, and has presented in different community education workshops. Why is this?
You may have frozen.
I think what we can do is we can come back to that and Ms. Bibbins, if you can just begin with your presentation, and then Susan can pick up later.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining this evening. And what I'm going to do is go to share my screen and kind of show you guys the PowerPoint and kind of go from there. So let's see if I can get this going. Give me just a moment, because now it doesn't look like it wants to pop up for me.
Seem to be up.
Yeah, the PowerPoint's not coming up for some reason. Give me just a second. Here we go. Okay, so thank you all for joining, and welcome to our talk about the trauma and attachment needs of African American children in the foster care system. And again, my name is Tammera Bibbins. Susan did a really good job of doing an introduction. I had kind of put that together. Right now, I am no longer with the Star Center. In October, I just recently transitioned full-time into private practice. But I do have a lot of experience working with children in the child welfare system and in foster care. So the goals for tonight, as we go through this presentation, are one, to gain a basic understanding of trauma, its effect on the body, emotions, and behavior of our kids. But keep in mind that when we talk about trauma and kids, this applies to all humans. So we can also look through the lens of, how does this affect me? How does my body react when I'm faced with trauma or excessive stress? Because if we can recognize it, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, if we can recognize it in ourselves, it might help us to have a little bit more empathy for when the children are struggling. Second goal, to gain an understanding of attachment trauma, which is, it's another kind of trauma that kids are affected by, but it still causes a disruption in emotions and behavior. So we're going to be looking at trauma and then a different kind of trauma, which is attachment trauma. Also, I want to start this understanding of how foster parents can also begin the healing process for kids. Often we take kids to therapy, we get them the resources, we get BHIS, But really the healing is going to start with where that child is residing and with who they're having those relationships with, those primary relationships. And so I do want to talk more, that last goal, about how the caregivers are the healers for kids. So let's talk about trauma and what it is. And so a basic definition that I have: the result of an extraordinarily stressful event that shatters our sense of safety and security in the world, possibly leaving us feeling helpless or powerless. Later on, I'll make a mention of big T's and little t's, but trauma can look different. It can be really big trauma. It can be natural disasters that happen, hurricanes, derechos, our houses are wiped away. Or it can be what someone might consider a little t, which is I'm sitting in the classroom and I feel that my teacher just doesn't like me, and I'm so scared and anxious that I can't think straight to perform or answer questions. And it's continuing and ongoing. So that is also a trauma. So we have big T traumas and little t traumas, but they all still have an impact. So when we're looking at trauma, basically, and we're going to break it down a little bit, it happens when a stressful event happens that overwhelms our ability to cope. Now, we all deal with stress. Life is stressful, and so stress is just a part of that. And we all have ways that we deal with that too. So if you think about having a stressful day at work, you come home and we all have our ways to kind of decompress from the day. Maybe it's taking a hot bath, or maybe it's having a nice warm drink of tea or something else, or talking to your family about the difficulties of the day. That usually can calm us down, get us back to our baseline, and then we're ready for the next day. A trauma happens when your everyday coping skills are not enough to get you back to baseline. Okay, let's see. There we go. Okay, so I just want you all to remember this. We're going to talk a little bit about the brain tonight. And remember that the brain's job is to keep its person alive. It's to keep its person safe. It's to keep its person from danger. And our brain does that all the time. It's working in the background doing that all the time. And it will do so without our conscious cognitive knowing. It's going to do its job regardless. And so will the brain of these little kids. So when trauma happens, there's a chain reaction that follows. So to begin talking about that, I want to talk about a part of the brain called the amygdala. It's the brain's alarm system. So if you think about a smoke alarm in a kitchen, smoke comes up, the alarm goes off, we know we need to act. We need to put out a fire, or maybe we need to evacuate. Our amygdala does the same thing. It sounds the warning, and then it's going to send out some chemicals in our bodies to get us to move or to react, but basically to get us to safety. That's the amygdala's job. Now, most of us are familiar with what I call threat responses. So we have fight, we have flight, and we have freeze. And I make mention later that we actually have more, but these are the main ones that we're used to talking about, and it's kind of an easy place to start. So we're going to talk about fight, flight, and freeze. The important thing to remember about this, again, these threat responses are not within our cognitive control. And I want us to think about our young ones. So when there's something that the brain perceives as dangerous, that signal hits the amygdala, the amygdala thinks there's danger, there's going to be a reaction, and it's not going to be a cognitive reaction. It's going to be an instinctual reaction to help get to safety. Oh no. So I had put in a little video clip, and for some reason it's not showing up there, to kind of talk. It's not available. Let's see if I can pull it up. Okay. Yeah. This video clip is just to demonstrate how much out of our cognitive ability these threat responses are. Our bodies are going to automatically respond when it senses danger. So I'm just going to show a couple of minutes of this clip and then we'll go back to the PowerPoint, maybe. Okay, so I'm gonna try to get this to pop back up. So in a lot of those instances, we see people's bodies reacting. The body is not stopping to think, am I safe? Or what should I do? It's not stopping to think, should I run or should I fight? The body is instinctually doing something. Now in these clips, most of the people are jumping or running. I looked for clips that kind of showed people actually punching. For these pranks, they usually have someone dressed up in a costume, hovering over someone. The person becomes aware and their first instinct is to hit. They're thinking about that. That person is not probably trying to be violent, but their body and that threat response is, I gotta get myself to safety. So I either gonna neutralize the threat by fighting, I'm gonna neutralize the threat by running, or I'm gonna hunker down, freeze, and hope the danger passes. So again, it's important to remember that we don't have control over really what the response is or the fact that the response is gonna happen. Our brain is doing its job to get us to safety. And I mentioned before, there's actually other threat responses. Flocking and fawning are other examples. Flocking is when we're in a group and we're scared. It's kind of known as safety in numbers. We tend to get together because as a group, as a tribe, we have a better chance of survival. Fawning might be where I really need this person to like me, so I'm going to shower them with compliments. I'm going to play up to them because they have something that's really, really important for my survival, or I might really, really need them. And it's also important to know that these responses are going to look different across different people and across different situations. So we go back to the child who's in a class where they feel the teacher just does not like them, and they get called on out of the blue to answer a question. That can be a freeze response where they can't get the words out, or they don't remember the answer, or they're speechless. That could be also a freeze response. Now, what someone might say is, that person's not in danger. Why would that be a threat response? It's not about survival. It is psychologically, because our brain not only tries to keep us physically safe, but it also tries to keep us psychologically safe. Safe in the fact that my sense of who I am is intact, my sense of well-being is intact, my sense of belonging and importance is intact. So our brain fights to keep that together as well. Now, one of the biggest and earliest threats to our survival as humans is not having a caregiver to meet our needs when we're young. And when those needs aren't adequately met by our caregivers, the brain now learns that the world is not safe. And so this is when attachment trauma is going to start to happen. Not having a caregiver available to meet young human needs, it hijacks the brain's ability to focus on normal human development. And now instead, the brain, which is going to keep us alive, is going to start focusing on how to meet survival needs. So young human brains are really not equipped to do this. They're still trying to learn about the world around them, let alone how do I keep myself safe. But that doesn't mean that the brain's not going to do that. The brain is still going to try and keep this, meet these needs because it's its job, and it takes its job very seriously. There's also that loss of an attachment figure, because through that relationship, when these needs aren't being met, that attachment figure is lost. That's very damaging, because ideally, through that relationship of having a safe, consistent caregiver, that's how we learn how to start managing stress, how to manage our emotions, how we start to find feelings of safety in this big world. It's a misconception that kids should know how to manage their emotions. But what actually happens is, over again, in a safe, nurturing relationship, the parent is slowly teaching that child how to self-soothe, how to calm down, how to manage emotions. When that doesn't happen, you have kids, which in therapist speak, we call dysregulated. It means their emotions aren't regulated and they do not know how to regulate their emotions. So we see big meltdowns, big temper tantrums, and quick triggers. When young brains haven't had their needs met and they do not have a consistent adult who helps them feel safe, the amygdala will be on its job, and it's most likely going to be hyper-functioning. So I just mentioned before, it's probably going to have a very sensitive trigger. And another thing about our brains is its job in keeping us safe, it's going to remember anything that was unsafe in the past. So if something scary happened to me in a room with gray walls, and later on in my life, I happen to be at a friend's house and they have a gray wall, I might just start having feelings of anxiety or discomfort, or maybe full-on panic. And I might not know why, but my brain remembers something bad happened in a gray room, and now I'm in a gray room again. And so it's trying to get me away, get me out of there. And I might not even know what's going on because it's not my conscious awareness, but my brain is doing its job. And that's what's called triggering or being triggered. So we talk a lot about being triggered nowadays. Being triggered is your brain signaling, hey, this reminds me of a past bad situation. I want you to pay attention. You might need to get out of there. We'll talk about therapy a little bit later, but that's where therapy is helpful. It helps the brain calm down and remember or realize, hey, a bad thing happened in this room with the gray wall before, but this new wall is not that same wall. It's a safe wall. You're in a safe place, so you don't have to have that threat response. We can kind of calm that down now. So it's safe to assume that children in foster care have not had some of their early needs met by their caregivers, and therefore we can assume that their amygdalas have been on alert more than the average child their age. So now we have a brain that's a little bit hyperactive and hypersensitive. We also know that there's been a disruption with that relationship of the adult who's supposed to take care of them. So when we are removed, not even just kids, but when we're removed from our familiar people, we also experience the loss of this sense of belonging. That's also a very basic human need. We need to feel like we belong. That goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So now we already have trauma, and now we're also looking at attachment trauma. So we have kids who really do not feel safe in this world. So what might that look like with some of these kiddos that are in care who have not had their needs met and now are not able to consistently be with their people who are with them from the beginning? Even if these people weren't safe, that attachment is going to be there, whether it's healthy or not. And so now they don't even have that. So now they're really not feeling safe in the world. So these are some ways that trauma will impact the kids, or these are the things that we might see as the adults in their lives. So you might see kids acting younger than their age. One way of looking at that was that the brain was not able to focus on development. The brain had to focus on safety. And so there are these developmental stages that the brain was not able to meet. Or the brain thinks, I need to act younger so that I can draw these people in to want to take care of me. So you might see kids like using baby talk when they're like 8, or you see regressive behaviors like wetting the bed. Those are all symptoms of stress and or trauma, and that the child has been traumatized. Another thing you might see is, and I call it indiscriminate attaching. But basically, it's like the child is going to gravitate to anyone. They haven't been able to build up a sense of what is safe and what's not. They weren't able to be taught that. Or another thing I hear often is, oh, this child is just attention seeking. They're doing a lot to bring attention to them. That means that their need for attention hasn't been met, or maybe the positive attention that they needed was not there, and they're really trying to get that. The brain knows, these kids, their brains know they need an adult to take care of them. So the brain is going to do what it can to bring attention to this child, or maybe try to build this relationship. We also see kids not listening to adults or being what we called oppositional. The hard thing about some of this trauma that these kids have experienced is it's the adults who have failed these kids in the past. So trusting adults in the brain's eye is not safe. But then that becomes difficult because we need the kids to listen, to follow the rules, or to learn the things that we're trying to teach them. But it's going to be really hard for them to trust that what you're saying is good for me. So that's another way that trauma impacts the kids. You'll see a lot of temper tantrums and meltdowns. One way of looking at that again was they did not have that consistent teacher of how do I manage my emotions? How do I tolerate some of the smaller stresses? Or maybe they just didn't even have a calm environment. Maybe your environment might be the first one that was actually calm, and now they have to try to learn how to be in that calmness. It's also something that kids do, or we all do. Even if the familiar is unhealthy or dysfunctional, familiarity feels safe. So sometimes we see kids trying to create that dysfunction because it's familiar, even though it's unhealthy. So those are things that therapy will be needed to help kind of tease apart and help them relearn or learn how to have a calmer, safer environment. So kind of going back to trying to be in control. And control means if you can control something, that means that it's going to be predictable for you. And when things are predictable, it feels safe. Again, even if it's a negative environment that's being created. A big thing that a lot of foster families might experience with some of their kiddos is food hoarding. And if there's been food insecurity in the past, their brain is going to do what it needs to do to try to make sure those basic needs are met. So if they've ever experienced not knowing where their next meal is going to come from, their brain is going to guide them to keep a stash or keep some food handy so they won't have to be in that situation again. Now, of course, that creates situations in the home, but it's because the kid is trying to keep their needs met. They're not trying to like make your home get bugs or make it dirty. They're just trying to get their needs met. Stealing is not too different from hoarding, where again, if I have come from deprivation, well, I'm going to try and get almost anything I can. It might make me feel good or make me feel like I'm going to have what I need if I just take things. Or they might not trust that what they need will be given to them. So again, I'm just going to take it. It's not meant to be, it's not meant to bring harm to whoever they may have stolen from. And we also tend to look at these kinds of things as moral issues when really it's an issue of survival. Lying as well. When you're not consistently cared for, or if you're directly abused and you don't trust the world, you're going to try to navigate that world as best you can. You might need to present yourself in a certain light, or maybe admitting mistakes is just too hard psychologically. It's going to threaten your sense of being psychologically okay. So instead of just admitting that I did something wrong, I'm going to lie about it. Again, it's not a moral issue, it's a trauma response. I didn't say this earlier, but I really do want to encourage, if anyone has questions or, you know, things that they want to ask as we go along, please feel free to unmute and jump in. And I don't know if there's just time at the end for Q&A, but I do want to let people have questions asked and answered as we're going along.
If you put your question in the chat, then that'll help us, and we can make sure everyone gets responded to.
All right, so let me try to, I froze there for a minute, excuse me. Okay, I'm just trying to advance my slide, and for some reason it's not working. So as soon as I can get it to move on.
While that's happening, editorial, this session is being recorded, so we'll you'll make sure you get access to the link, you know, because it is good information and you can go back and review it. So we will record this.
We'll also provide some information about the PowerPoint slides afterwards, so people will have that too.
I'm not sure why this is stuck. Okay. So as I was saying before, another way to really look at these behaviors is not in a moral way, but more as threat responses and the kids trying to survive. Okay, I'm going to keep playing around. I'm not sure what just happened.
Would it help if you forwarded everything over to Victoria and have her run the slides from her computer? What do you think?
It might help to close your other tabs too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's probably what's happening. Although this isn't my computer. Let's close. Yeah, if I close them out, I might mess up someone else's stuff. Let's just see if this will, if I can get through. Let's see. Okay. The other thing I want the adults to really remember is that when the kids are doing these behaviors, that it's really not like a cognitive thought that, oh, I'm gonna steal or I'm gonna lie. If we look at these as threat responses and as the brain's way of trying to protect these kids, it puts us into more of a mode of problem solving and helping, as opposed to, okay, now I'm gonna try and make this, kid do the right thing. Because when we're in survival brain, that's all we're doing is we're surviving. And just like in that video, we're just moving. We're not consciously thinking about what's going on. And so just another reminder that kids in foster care will most likely have that part of their brain, their amygdala, is easily triggered for feelings, for danger, feelings of unsafety. And so we're going to tend to see those behaviors a lot more frequently. That is until the kid starts to heal from that trauma, which does happen. So we're looking at the behaviors, we're looking at the threat responses, we're seeing all these like difficult situations. So what can we do? We can do some things. So first, it's saying thank you to those who have made that decision that I want to be a part of helping these kids. I want to be a foster parent or guardian, or I'm a family member and I'm taking these kids in, or even just a suitable other. And I say thank you because, we know that there are so many kids who need this help. And for those of you who are able to and decided to take that step, thank you. It's the first step. These kids just need a safe physical environment. That's the beginning of it, is having a safe physical environment. But second, now I'm putting on my therapist hat. Once we're starting therapy, I'm asking the adults in these kids' lives, let's begin to shift your perspective on parenting. Most of us grew up with the, behavior consequence. You do something you're not supposed to, here's a consequence. What we know about children who've been impacted by trauma, and because of the brain being in survival mode, we can't consequence these kids out of these behaviors. We have to go to an emotional level. We have to start looking at healing first and building up that safe relationship. And then we can look at the behaviors. But actually, once the emotions are addressed and they're feeling safe, we're going to see those behaviors decrease. Because the amygdala is always looking for safety, checking to see, am I safe, am I not? The first and most important step in helping children impacted by trauma is to begin building a safe and nurturing relationship with that child. That sounds like, very sensical, but if you think about it, you're bringing in someone who you don't know. Maybe this child has really difficult behaviors off the bat, and it kind of makes you feel like, oh, I'm going to kind of keep this child at arm's distance. Or just being a foster parent, knowing that this child is here temporarily, hopefully, because we want them to get back with their family. We want the family to heal. Some parents might think, I'm going to hold myself a little bit at a distance because it's going to be too hard for me to fully engage with this child because they're only going to be here temporarily. It'll be too hard for me to really create this relationship. But that is the very thing that these kids need. Actually, that's what we all need. We all thrive in relationship with one another. Absent relationships, humans, we don't do well. We are wired to connect socially. And these kids absolutely need that because they're still developing. Their brain's not all the way finished. So that relationship, that safe relationship, is vital. It's very important. The caveat to that is it can take some time to really build that safe relationship because that child has experienced unsafe adults in their past. And just like this gray wall that has been unsafe to me in the past, I might do some things to avoid it. Now we're working with a child who the very thing they need is the very thing that they may be scared of. So that is going to take some time and it's going to take some therapy. But again, it can be undone because I've seen that happen. So for the adults who have taken that challenge to be a placement for that child, here you go. This is your very important job. You are in the very position to create that healthy attachment relationship with that child, and your positive relationship can help this child feel safe. And more importantly, if this brain is able to go back to just being able to go back to that normal track of human development so that kid can pick up the skills, pick up learning how to socialize, that's so healing. And that child doesn't have to worry about safety anymore. You can give that amygdala a rest. You can be the alarm for safety. So the kid can just focus on being a kid. Now, I want to speak specifically to our African American kids in care. We know that the data shows us that our kids tend to enter foster care at higher rates. We tend to stay in care longer and are less likely to have caregivers who reflect their racial and cultural identities. In addition to the trauma that we've just been talking about, just childhood trauma from not having caregivers that are able to adequately care, our African American kids are also recipients of the same cultural and systemic racism and oppression that we adults face. So now we're talking about kids who really kind of have a double impact, a double dose of trauma. So our kids are even more vulnerable. Just some small statistics. As of 2018, Iowans who identified as Black or African American, we make up just about 4% of Iowa's general population, but comprise 16.7% of the state's foster care population. So that just tells you how much disparity that we're looking at for our African American kids. So what does this mean for us? There are efforts in place right now to help decrease the disparity of, the high numbers of children, of Black children in care. And I've been very heartened to see those over the years. We need to continue. It's not enough because we're still looking at such a disparity, 4% versus 16.7, but it is being addressed. People do see the needs that are there, that we need to work on it. The system is not perfect. It has a lot of flaws. It's the system we have though, but we just need to continue the work that's being done. We also need a lot more provider or foster parents of color for our African-American children. If we're trying to match up our children to have same race, same culture placements, we need more of the adults to do this. Being a foster parent is a big job. It's a hard job, but it's an important job. And I applaud the recruitment efforts that are out there to get more families of color to meet the needs of our children. So when children are placed in a transracial placement, it's vitally important that the foster parents learn about and engage with that child's Native community. So that means at the adult level, those adults, if they're not connected with the community that child comes from, that they begin to connect with that community, because then it makes it much easier for them to continue the engagement with that child in their culture, in their community. I put hair and skincare as a very small example because it's really much bigger than that, but that's something that's kind of easily understood. So if a Caucasian family has a young African-American boy in care and they need to get his hair cut, we have Black barbershops here in the city. But if this family is never engaged in going to a Black neighborhood or engaged with Black people, that might feel difficult for them to walk into that barbershop. But that's important that they themselves get comfortable or expose themselves to that, because he does need to go to a Black barbershop and get his hair cut and keep that grooming going the way that it had been in the past. Just a little anecdote. I have a son, and when he was younger, I was in a rush and he needed to get his hair cut. and I was by like Great Clips or something like that. And it was a Caucasian lady. And I said, do you know how to cut African-American boys' hair? She assured me she did. So I let him get in the chair. But what happened was, like, she knew how to like kind of cut it down and everything, but she didn't know how to line it up. Like, she didn't even know what I was talking about when I said that. And so those things are important. And so if you have a child who comes from a different culture, different community, as the adult, it really is important that you begin to engage with that community. So some points to remember. No matter for the caregivers, no matter how much it may feel like the child is, no matter how much it may feel like it, the child is not purposefully doing negative things to make life hard. Their brain is doing the best to help them survive some very hard situations. Also, really try not to take the child's behaviors personally. It can really feel that it's personal and it's directed at you. You just happen to be the person that's there. And so you kind of get targeted, but it's really not about you. It's about this child, again, trying to survive and trying to figure out their way through some really hard situations. As a caregiver, remember that you might be the first person that's been available to help them learn about managing their big feelings, or the first person that has shown them a calm environment. A thing that I always talk to the parents I work with is that calm bodies, calm bodies. Your calm body can help calm that body of that child. But that means you have to figure out how to get your body to calm when there's incidents or things happening. Like, you have to be calm first, but your calmness will help calm that child. And I say that because we know now that when we're in different emotional states, there's different chemicals going through our bodies. If we're feeling happy, joyful, and connected, we've got oxytocin going through our body. If we're stressed and anxious, or if something big just happened, we probably have adrenaline going through our body. We read each other's body chemicals. And so if I'm dysregulated and I go talk to a friend and they're nice and calm, my body is going to slowly start to calm down because their calmness is helping me. And it works the other way. I know that if we've gone to work and someone's like in a big negative mood, like, you can kind of feel that, and you might have to do some work not to take it on. But we can change each other's chemistry. So we can do that for the good and for the helpful. It will be important to get this child into a trauma-focused therapy that will focus on repairing attachment trauma. I'm going to emphasize trauma-focused and also attachment trauma. There are a lot of different therapies out there, a lot of different kinds of therapists out there, but working strictly on behaviors, behavior management, the behavior charts is not going to work for these kids, because remember, we're now dealing with a brain that does not feel safe. And when we're in our emotional brain, when that is highly emotional, the cognitive side does not have room to think through things. We're on automatic pilot. So we need a therapy that's going to address the trauma and work on reprocessing that trauma. So therapy for children impacted by trauma is going to look different than like other, traditional therapies where it's about going after the behavior. Myself and my coworker at the Star Center, we'd always say, like, when the parents would bring us a laundry list, well, they did this, they did that, and we need to talk about that. And it's hard for the parents to understand, no, we don't need to talk about that. What we need to talk about is, okay, how are we working on the coping skills? How are we working on managing the big feelings? Those behaviors are going to go down once the safety comes up. So again, the therapy is going to focus on creating that felt sense of safety and emotional regulation in that child. And once that sense of safety is like kind of there, then we can start looking at the past trauma. I happen to be trained in EMDR, which is a specific type of therapy that targets trauma. So if this child is finally at a stage where they're feeling somewhat safe and they're not being triggered so much, we can start reworking some of that past trauma to even lower the amount of triggering that's going to happen. This therapy is different also because caregivers are required to be a part of this therapeutic process because we want to help you and that child build that safe attached relationship. Now, past therapy, you take the kid, you send them into the therapist, they do what they're doing, and they come out. But when we're talking about trauma and attachment therapy, the caregivers really are front and center in that process. That's going to give the caregiver a chance to learn about the trauma, how it's specifically impacting that particular child, and then what do I need to do in my home environment to help create that sense of safety. So for the caregivers, the often unspoken truth is that we all have some kind of trauma. It's not just the kids. And so as a caregiver, some things that happen with the kids may trigger your own traumas, or it can poke some of the negative beliefs. And without getting into that too much, we all have this inner critic that, you know, that we're dealing with. And sometimes we have to do positive self-talk to kind of talk it out. But a negative belief that a parent might have is, I have to prove I'm a good parent and my kids always have to behave. And so you have this child who has like difficult behaviors, that's going to be poking that belief. And I call it a negative belief because, well, just like we know, always and never, it's just not logical. And so if we're trying to make this happen, always have a child who always behaves, it's self-defeating. And then you're going to be burnt out trying to make that happen instead of trying to figure out how can I be the most, you know, connected parent, and how do I do the best that I can and be okay with that. I always do recommend therapy for the caregiver because this is hard emotional work. And when you care about these kids and you're giving it a lot, it takes a lot from you. It's important and rewarding, but it is hard work. And in that, it's important for the caregiver to make sure that their emotional needs are being met and that they're doing self-care as they're doing this work for the kids. So it'll be helpful for the caregivers to have some kind of a support network, because caregiving is hard work and we know that it really does take a village. So you really don't try to go this alone. Try to create those networks. Having respite is vitally important because you are going to need a break. When the kid is system involved, I'll say if you're a formal foster parent, respite can be a part of the case. But if you're like kinship care or suitable other, it might be harder to find respite, but keep trying to do that because you're going to need a break. And remember why you're doing it. Remember when you decided to become this caregiver that you did it for these very important reasons. So sometimes when it's getting hard and rough, remember that. And that might just give you a little bit more breath just to keep going. And don't forget your humanity and that you're human and that it's okay that things don't go smooth and that it might not look the way you planned, but you being there for that child is what is the most important thing. So here are just a few resources. I wasn't able to figure out how to connect Amazon in this, but there's a workbook on Amazon. It's called the Integrative Parenting Workbook, which is the workbook that follows the protocol that we used at the Star Center. And it really walks through looking at the kids' behavior through the lens of trauma and how their brain is trying to keep the kids safe. Blank Children's Hospital Star Center, their primary clinic is a really good place to start looking for therapy if you're looking for therapy for one of your kids. And I can get the number out if we need to do that. And IFAPA, Iowa Foster and Adoptive Parent Association, has a website and a lot of resources for parents, and not just like if you're a foster parent, but anyone who's a caregiver of children in care. My hope is that we can get some support groups going specifically for these trauma-focused families of parents who've been through it and can walk new parents through it. And that's something that might be happening at the Star Center. But what I do want to say is I've seen children with some really difficult behaviors really change once the parents were able to understand and shift that perspective of parenting that I'll say that most of us grew up with. So I want to say that's kind of a brief overview of how trauma can impact the kids and what we can begin to do as adults in their lives to try to help and make a dent in that. So thank you for your time this evening. And this is just my information if anyone needed to reach out to me.
Thank you, Tammera, for a really helpful talk and lots of information. People have been commenting on how much information, useful information that you've included. So I know we're all really going to be looking forward to sharing, getting those shared handouts for the parents and for the attendees this evening. We may have a few questions.
Okay.
I know that at least one of them earlier you've already touched on, and that is dealing with the question of having help for parents who might need some support as a part of this process. I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit about the ways in which foster kids are categorized when it comes to trauma focused therapy. Are there ways in which you have landmarks of healthy development depending on the age in which the child goes?
Oh, do you mean like if they're like between 5 and 7, this is what they should be doing to know if they're on target and operating in a more healthy way versus if they're, I have a lot of feedback. Is that kind of what was meant by the question?
I think she's
Can you hear me?
frozen. Until she comes back, can you answer this question? There was a question about, do you think the child will test the new relationship to see what the foster parents will do, stay, or leave them?
Absolutely, they will. That lack of trust is there, and so they want to know: are you going to be like in my past, or are you going to be someone that I can really count on? And they might kind of go to some extremes with that, which is why it's really important for the caregivers to have their support, because it can get difficult.
Okay, the next question I have is, do you think the trauma aspect of hoarding and lying start to resolve themselves or not as frequently?
Food insecurity, especially if it happens really young, is hard to help the brain get rewired to understand their needs will be met, but it can happen. I've had a lot of foster parents who will just have food that's out that is community food, or maybe even they have their own little box or bowl that there's always food there, healthy choices, so that they know at any given time, I have access to food. And that's just one little intervention that helps to calm that down.
What is the impact of some of the behaviors you're describing on children's progress in school?
It's very difficult because if you're triggered or you have a lot of meltdowns, you can imagine that makes school very difficult. So at the Star Center, we do a lot of collaboration with with everyone in the child's life, but even with the school. So we might need to set up plans for if the child's starting to feel dysregulated, that they might have a chance to go to a different room and calm down, or maybe they can sit a little bit separately. And we really try to educate the teachers on what's going on, so they don't feel like this is just a bad student, but they're really just emotionally struggling.
I think we have time for one more question.
Are there appointments available for parents from all over Iowa? And do you have affiliates in other places in Iowa?
What I can do is work with you moderators and give the information that I do have. So at the Star Center, I don't know what appointments that they have available right now. and affiliate. No, there aren't any affiliates right now. There are a couple, there's another place, it's in Omaha, that does the same thing. So I know they serve like kind of the Sioux City, Western Iowa side where they do the same kind of work. And they're actually the ones that trained us. Our hope is that we can get more centers and more agencies to adopt this protocol, which is integrative parenting, to help parents,
Mhm.
caregivers.
I see a question. Brandy Miller has her hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I have a question regarding teenagers. I have a grandson that right now in care with me. He's 13, struggling with the lying and struggling with school. And so I think I wasn't listening. I mean, I wasn't approaching him from the trauma side of things. I was approaching it from, he's lying to me, and I don't like that. So this gives me a new take on that, that has to stop, right? So does this stop or does it continue? Because we're talking about an older kid now, so he can actually get in trouble. He can go to juvie, so there's more consequences with the behavior. So everybody's not going to be listening from a trauma ear, like, oh, well, he's lying because he has trauma. They just going to be like, he's lying, he did this wrong. He's suspended from computer. You know what I mean? So that kind of thing.
Yep. I will say I've seen it stop, I've seen it decrease. And what's going to be important is, as much as we can, not get into power struggles with the kids. But if we can come from, okay, this isn't a moral issue, so I don't have to try to make it happen. I'm still going to be that adult that is listening, and we're working on the trauma. Because if we get into a power struggle, then that's what they're going to do. These kids are good at trying to use control because they already are in survival mode. So we want to approach them differently than what they're already doing. We don't want to engage in power struggles as much as possible. But just with any human being, once we are really heard and listened to, and we know that we're cared for, our defenses come down, and then we're able to engage in pro-social behavior.
Do we have any other questions? If not, then Tammera, I really want to thank you for coming to speak with us this evening. It's been a really tremendous session. You've given us a lot to think about and some great resources to follow up on. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me. And again, feel free to contact me at my number or my email, and I will be passing on the slideshow to the moderators. And I can also get some more information about agencies that share this protocol or way of working with families.
Can I mention, we actually just had one more question that popped in, and that's from Janice Lintz, and that is it recommended that the child's therapist be the same as their foster parents?
No, and actually some separation might be helpful. And again, what Star Center would do is we're working with the child and intensely with the child and the parent. That parent will have a totally different therapist, and that might feel safer for the parent just to have their own person, but we would collaborate with them also. So if the therapist saying, okay, the parent is struggling with this or didn't understand this, that might inform how then the therapist with the child will approach that next session.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank
Really
you all.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Tammera, and thank you, Dr. Susan, for moderating our session this evening. And we know that technology in this virtual world, we love it, and then it becomes our nemesis. So we appreciate those of you that joined us this evening, and hope you got your information in the chat for the CEU and for foster care credit. So thank you again, and we will stay tuned for the next session.
Keep up the good work.
Yep. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.